You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Brophy. This evening, Roisin, we have a very fascinating guest. We have Deputy Cathal Berry, who is currently TD for independent TD for Kildare South. Deputy Berry is a medical doctor and also a military veteran. Cahill was serving member of the Defence Forces for 23 years. Since then, he served in Army Rangering, where he was applied in a number of different countries between Chad, the Balkans, Africa. The list goes on. In 2008, Cahill led the Army Ranger wing unit in Chad, and subsequently, following on from his military career, he took a self-funded career break to become a medical doctor, where he trained in the Royal College of Surgeons. Cahill has worked in the HSE in a number of emergency medicine units, and also became the head of the military school of military medicine in the borough before entering politics. So, Cahill, you're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup.
Great to be here, Paul. Thanks for being and thanks for watching as well. Great to be on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose, Cahill, you have a massive background in the Defence Forces. You're, as I said in my introduction, you were in the Army Ranger Wing um, for 6 years. You were deployed abroad. The Irish soldiers are currently based in the Lebanon. It's been a challenging time for them at the moment, particularly their families as well. But do you think the situation is going to ease there, or do you think we could be in for a long haul?
I think we're going to be in for a long haul, Paul, actually. A long haul regionally. There is a small chance, of course, that the situation on the Lebanese border, so that Israel's northern border, that might stabilise. But I think regionally we're in for a long haul. A lot depends on who wins in Washington on Tuesday. I think that's
Yeah,
going to be the dominant factor in relation to what trajectory we're on. If it's Trump, then all bets are off. If it's Kamala Harris, I think that's a better chance for peace, because she won't need to be re-elected for a while, so she'll be well able to again put a small bit of a dampener in relation to what's happening regionally and the Netanyahu government, put a few more guardrails and a few more constraints, and hopefully stop supplying of the munitions as well, which is very important, because if you don't have the means to prosecute this war, then you won't be able to proceed. So look, hopefully things will stabilise a small, but at least where UNIFIL is, there's a scheduled rotation of Irish troops taking place in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So there's about 350 fresh troops going out. The 350 troops out there are going to come back after their 6-month tour of duty and a well-earned break with their families as well. So hopefully that rotation proceeds as planned.
and having that presence there is so important for the preservation of peace, because they are, the eyes and ears of the international community. They're there to report on what's going on, and there was some suggestions that they should, Ireland should pull their troops out of there, but that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of pressure came on. You might remember about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a large squadron of Merkava main battle tanks pulled up right next to one of the Irish outposts, called sign 652. Only 30 troops in that position, and the commander is in his early 20s. Most of their troops, the average age would be in their early 20s as well, but they were well able for it. They weren't intimidated, they weren't pushed around. And all they had is rifles and a few rockets. And
Hmm.
the expectation was that the Irish would withdraw, and they didn't. And it's very important that they didn't, because it would have created a chain reaction all along the blue line. There's about 25 posts there in total. And if the Irish pulled
So,
out, if some of the best troops pulled out as a result of intimidation, then the other troops would probably do something similar as well. So it was so important that the Irish troops stood their ground, and they made a huge difference internationally. And as I said before, history can turn on the smallest of hinges. And I think that Irish platoon at Outpost 652 was certainly a historic hinge from that point of view.
and there's been an Irish presence peacekeeping wise in the Middle East since 1958. So Ireland's history as regards peacekeeping is second to none.
Absolutely. And the new battalion that's heading out there in 2 to 3 weeks' time, would you believe there's a father and son team travelling actually? So Sergeant Major Paddy Enfield is the Sergeant Major, and his son is also deploying in his first tour of duty. So it must be unusual having your dad being your boss on an overseas deployment. So that just shows the intergenerational commitment that Ireland has had to South Lebanon. And we're there for the long haul, through thick and thin, through boom and bust, through war and peace, and long may that continue.
Absolutely. And I know people are involved with the Lebanese community here in Ireland, and they can speak, very good things of the Irish soldiers over in Lebanon and their contribution towards peace in the region as well. So, it just goes to show that having that presence is so important.
Absolutely. And look at what happened in Gaza, where there was no UNIFIL presence. That just shows you that, as I said, there's no constraints whatsoever there, and the entire strip has been flattened. And the same hasn't happened in Lebanon, and for good reason as well, because it's much more open to the international community. There are journalists with freedom of movement to be able to travel around, and obviously there's 10,000 UNIFIL troops there as well. And there is a train of thought as well that if there was a UNIFIL type operation on Israel's southern border with Gaza, would that Hamas attack even have occurred in October of last year? Because obviously, clearly, the Israeli Defense Force wasn't up to the job to protect their own border. Had there been a buffer zone between Gaza Strip and Lebanon, that could have provided that buffer, basically, that comfort zone to prevent the attack even happening in the first place, or at least UNIFIL or a UN mission could have detected the preparation of that attack and give due warning to prevent it from happening. So that's an open question. We never know the answer to that, but needless to say, it would have been a far more likely scenario had a UN mission been there.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
Deputy, you are a former Defence Force member, part of our Army Ranger Wing, one of the best battalions and very proud Army Ranger Wings. And now you have entered politics. And really, a lot of people are talking about we need a separate Department of Defence and a full Minister of Defence. We're going into a general election, and do you think that should be one of the main things for a programme for government, that we do have that separate department with a full minister?
Absolutely. So we have 2 finance ministers at the moment. We've got 2 education ministers, but we don't have any standalone defence minister. And I can understand why we did have 2 finance ministers, because when the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, when that ministry was established in 2012, the IMF were in town. The threats against Ireland were financial and economic at the time. And it's appropriate that you I guess, orientate your cabinet portfolio to face the threats of the day. But now the threats are geopolitical. So my own personal view is, I don't think you need a standalone Minister for Higher Education. A junior minister would suffice there, but we really need to up our national security responsibilities. And it's very hard for soldiers, sailors and aviators to take their jobs seriously when they see that the government aren't prioritising their role. If you want to know someone's priorities, don't look at the press release. Show me the composition of your cabinet and I'll tell you your priorities. So I agree entirely with you. Standalone defence ministers, just like every other EU country, bar tiny Malta, is an absolute precondition for success.
And would you also sort of encourage more members, veterans, to go into politics?
100%. There's a great campaign in the United States at the moment. It's called #VoteVets. Vote veterans, basically. And what it says is that, look, veterans really have the right mindset and the right skill set to really raise the bar and add a lot of value from a political point of view. And it's very, very important. In the UK, for instance, very, very important in the US. People value people with military experience. They don't talk about serving their country. They've actually done it. They've taken significant risks. Their families know all about service and sacrifice as well. And just the skills that you can bring to the table are so important. Your composure, your temperament, and your communication skills in particular, and also your ability to work with, people that you might happen to disagree with. It's a very important skill. They don't teach you that in school. But if you're in the Irish Defence Force in particular, all your EU and your UN experience, you interact with people that have completely different values, completely different customs, and completely different priorities than you, but you can still find common ground somewhere. And the focus then is to let's just proceed on that basis and at least deal with the common ground issues first, and then we can focus on the point of difference thereafter. So I think military skill is really important. What's very hopeful is there is a new councillor in Manstraven in Kildare, and he's a retired sergeant major. That's only happened in May. And 2 former members of the Naval Service. One is now a councillor in Middleton, and the other is a councillor in Cove. So maybe we've started the ball rolling a little bit. And I think those councillors, they have good step-up potential for national office as well when the next election comes in about 4 years' time. So I think there's great potential. I think more people that see military veterans performing on the national stage, the more veterans will go, okay. It gives them a lot of confidence and self-assurance that those skills that they've acquired in the military, both home and abroad, are very, very transferable and very, very applicable to Irish political life.
Absolutely. And Cathal, there have been some reforms in the Defence Forces since 2020, since you're being elected, despite the fact we don't have a standalone Department of Defence. Which reforms do you think have been beneficial and positive, and which reforms do you think were a bit missed the mark?
Yeah, so nearly all of them have been positive. So I've worked very, very well with both defence ministers, really. So Simon Coveney was the first one, and Micheál Martin is the current one. I think there was a recognition after the last election that, yes, the military, the defence forces have been very, very poorly treated. They've been asset stripped over the last decade in particular. Morale is in people's boots, it's so low, and that they didn't get the political prioritisation and that they rightly deserve. Of course, the situation in Ukraine has really turbocharged that, and now the Middle East as well. So I think people understand the issue of national security is much higher up the political priority list than it was in the past. So there has been some fairly good progress, but we need at least another 5 years of sustained momentum to keep things going. So I'm very happy to list out some of the points of progress if you wish, if you want to go into detail.
Yeah,
we talking about the 5 Ps.
Okay.
The first one is pay. The second one is premises. The third one is purpose. The fourth one is people, and the fifth one is public. So there's this for all the progress has occurred. So from a pay point of view, a brand new 3-star private, maybe 18 years of age, their starting salary is €40,000 annum, which is good money. Now they are working hard, 60, 70 hours a week for that, but it's a 48% uplift on where it was 5 years ago at the start of this stall. I mean, that is substantial progress. You can talk to an 18-year-old teenager and go, listen, you can actually join the Defence Forces and earn a good living now, particularly if you join the Navy. So in fairness, they've been talking about it for about a decade, but on the 1st of January this year, so about maybe 10 months ago, they've doubled the offshore allowances. And as a result, you can now earn about €130 into your hand extra a day if you go to sea. So that's very, very positive from a pay perspective. Secondly, then, from a premises point of view, I mean, a lot of the army bases now at the moment are like building sites, really. There's about €30 million going into the Curragh. There's 6 building projects taking place. It's a new cadet school, new vehicle-based workshops, new communications headquarters, new engineering building. There's a building that I'm not supposed to talk about, which I won't, but 10 million is going to there. And there's buildings all over the country as well, in McKee Barracks in Dublin, in the Naval Base, and in Balkans. And in fact, there's actually 3 master plans underway at the moment. If you go to a university like Limerick, for instance, they know what their university is going to look like at 2050, and they're working towards that over the next 25 years. There's a master plan for the Naval Base underway, master plan for Balkans, and a master plan for the Curragh as well. So good progress from a premises point of view. The purpose piece, really important. And the third P, We saw what our troops did in Kabul during the evacuation operation, ARW-wise. We saw what they did in Sudan, and we certainly saw what they did as part of the Joint Task Force, the maritime counter-narcotics operation of the Cork Coast and the MV Matthew there last year. I mean, that was incredible work. We had mostly Kildare soldiers who slid down those ropes onto the heaving deck of the MV Matthew on the high seas and took down a ship in front of the international media that made international media news. So from a purpose point of view, and particularly from a peacekeeping point of view as well, a lot of troops who are currently serving, a lot of veterans who've had served, a lot of teenagers who haven't yet served are looking at this going, there's actually a sense of pride in the Defence Forces again, because they see their utility and how the state really values and can value even more what they do. So that's the three P's that would jump straight to mind. The fourth one I think we said was about the public. I think the public have a greater awareness, and as a result, the politicians have a better awareness as well, because when they're knocking on doors, national security is coming up a little bit more. People are concerned about what's happening in Eastern Europe. And let's remember, it's not a Ukrainian war. It's a global war that just happens to be taking place primarily in Ukraine and the Russian border at the moment. We don't know what trajectory that's on. So I suppose in summary, lots more to do. Another 5 years would certainly help, but there has been a lot of progress from a pay point of view, from a purpose point of view, from a premises point of view, from a public point of view. And then the last P is people, which is the most important, because we are in the people business. But for the first year in a decade, there's going to be a net increase in the number of personnel serving in the Defence Force, both regular and reserve, in 2024. A remarkable turnaround. Now, it'll be a small increase, maybe 2 or 3 dozen, but it's a start. It's an inflection point. And if we can keep that momentum going into 2025, then, I mean, it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The best recruiters out there from a defence point of view are the people who are currently serving. If they feel that there's reinforcements coming in, if they feel they're properly resourced for the first time ever, word will filter out very, very quickly. This is a good place to work, and it's an employer of choice. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, and here in Kilkenny, the 3rd Infantry Battalion, there has been a brand new, up-to-date super gym has been built, and also the accommodation has been upgraded and lovely accommodation there. So, and in the street where I live now, my son is a member of the Defence Forces, and a neighbour a couple of doors down is also a member of the Defence Forces. So, and when you think about it too, you talk about the paying conditions have increased. My son is buying his first house, and he is single, 28 years of age, and buying his first property. How many other people? My daughter is, she went back to study postgrad medicine. She's now in Australia working, because my son is actually earning more than a junior doctor. So the Defence Forces have really, they really make us proud, don't they? They really do. They're the best ambassadors for Ireland as well.
Yes, they say Ireland's best export, Roisin, and I say that with full respect, obviously enough, and it is true. And our diplomatic corps do a great job, all our ambassadors, but our ambassadors don't really wear an Irish tricolour on their shoulder. Where our troops, whether they be soldiers, sailors, or aviators, they do, and they're the physical expression of Irish defence policy and foreign policy as well. And let's remember, it didn't always exist. 110 years ago, we didn't have a defence force. We weren't allowed to have a defence force. So we should never take those things for granted. And national security is important, that we're in a position to protect our island home, and to know better people than our defence forces do. As we always say, when every second counts, you can count on the defence forces.
Yeah. And what happened when there was a cyber attack within the HSE? Who did they call? The Defence Forces.
Absolutely. Whenever there's a crisis, the people who'll always front up and will always put their shoulders to the wheel and will always mend the pumps, they're our military people, and they'll never go on strike. They'll never walk off the job. They're Ireland's ideal employees. Every employer's dream, basically. The culture and just the attitude and the skill set and mindset is second to none.
I suppose that's when you are a member of the Defence Forces, you're always kind of, every day you're going in and you're preparing yourself for the worst case scenario. So if it does hit, you're ready to go. So that's you can't ask for anything more than that.
Yeah, and I think there's a greater political awareness as well, isn't there? And in fairness, it's kind of cross-party, really. Um,
Mm.
Most people value the work that the defence forces are doing now. They mightn't have been aware of that maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I think there's a greater awareness of national security. When I say national security, I'm not just talking about the physical defence security, but also food security, cyber security, climate security, that the country moves back towards self-sufficiency, just like our founding fathers and mothers. They were always in about Ireland should be self-sufficient, and they were right, because look how the geopolitical situation in the world is now, whether it was a pandemic, whether it was Brexit, whether it was the two wars either in the Middle East or Ukraine. People are looking to I guess, shorten their supply chains and have more national resilience. And I think we're finally learning that. But I hope I'm wrong. But I would like to think that global events don't overtake us here, and we don't get caught rotten by not being prepared enough. Now we are starting to improve, but unfortunately the pace isn't as strong as I'd like it to be. But that's okay, because there's a new program for government going to be negotiated over Christmas in a few weeks' time, and hopefully I'll be inside in that room and fighting hard for our defence forces.
And when you talk about the changing geopolitical situation in the world, it's changing on a daily basis. But Ireland is not immune from that change as well. We look at our whole question of neutrality. You go over the next couple of years. How do you see Ireland's military position evolving?
I actually see it staying exactly as it was when we first declared neutrality in 1939. There was a brilliant description of Ireland during the emergency. It was Ireland was neutral on the side of the Allies, and we're still neutral on the side of advanced Western democracies, and that's the way it should go. So we obviously declared our intention to not get involved in direct hostilities during the Second World War, that we would be actively supportive of the Western democracies at the time. And we've been doing exactly the same since then. We've been cooperating with our neighbours. We know what side we're on. Obviously, we try and stay out of conflict. So I don't see any change to our independent, neutral, non-aligned status. But I would say that there'll probably be even more cooperation on a case-by-case basis and on a voluntary basis with our neighbours, because that's completely normal. Everybody needs good neighbours. There's already a memorandum of understanding between the Irish Department of Defence and the UK MOD, their Ministry of Defence over there. And we also have one with Romania, and I'd say France is probably the next port of call. There's going to be an Irish Defence Attaché, so a colonel, an Irish serving colonel, will be placed in the Irish Embassy in London as well, probably before Christmas. And that's a big step forward, that they recognise the military links between these two islands as well. There's already a UK Defence Attaché in the UK Embassy in Dublin, and now we'll have a reciprocal arrangement where this Memorandum of Understanding is a great framework, and these two people will be able to maximise its utility.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think the Defence Forces, as Roisin mentioned there, I saw it for myself firsthand, when the cyber attack hit the HSC, I think it was in 2021, the Defence Forces were called in. Do you see, with the way the world is evolving, you can start a war without from your keyboard now, without that's just the way technology has evolved. Do you think that the Defence Forces would have a greater role in cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a new cyber command that's been established only a few weeks ago. There's Brigadier General Brian Cleary has been put in charge of that. So there's an awareness that we need to be able to protect ourselves across all 5 domains. Really, the 5 domains are the 3 traditional ones, first of all, which is land, sea, and air. But there's also space, and there's cyberspace as well. So we need to have some bit of a capability there. From that point of view, obviously from a space point of view, it's more from a navigation devices and obviously satellite imagery and communications. That's the issue there, rather than having a capability in space, but at least to have some kind of awareness. So we should be able to do full spectrum, multi-domain operations, because that's the way things are going. You don't have to invade a country and put tanks on your adversary's main street of the capital city anymore. You can paralyze a country in cyberspace And that is a big concern. Obviously, drone conflict is a big concern as well. We've seen how effective drones are in Ukraine. But over the next 5 years, again, what I've learned over the last 5 years is if somebody told me back in February 2020, when I became a TD, that over the next 5 years there's going to be a pandemic, there's going to be the first major land war in Europe in 75 years, and the Middle East is going to be a tinderbox, and it's all going to kick off in the Middle East in your first Dáil term, I would probably have looked at them and said, that's highly, highly unlikely to happen. And it was highly, highly unlikely to happen. But all those three black swan events occurred, and really only one of them has dissipated. The other two are still in full flight. We don't know what trajectory they're on. Are they going to get worse before they get better? Or is it even going to get even broader? I mean, are we looking at an issue in Taiwan, for instance, in the Pacific? It's all really down to how the Americans vote really on Tuesday in a few days' time, and that'll set out, I guess, the trajectory that the world will be on over the next 4 years. So hopefully we get some good news from Washington in the next 48 hours or so.
And that brings me nicely on to a nice question. Is a lot of people, you had the military career, you're a doctor, and what inspired you to enter the political representation of political life?
Great question. I kind of fell into it by accident, really. Obviously, I was in the military. Obviously, I was a doc. I was working as a doctor in the military, and a lot of troops would come in and say, look, I don't have fuel. I don't have money to put fuel in my car for tomorrow. Is there anything you can do? And you try and arrange for them to get some time off for the commanding officer if that's the case. Then they come in and say, look, my knee is injured in an exercise. I have to sign on for a contract in a few weeks' time. My knee is busted. I don't have money for an operation. Is there anything you can do to help me out, you know? So all these stories started to come in, and you get to meet a patient one-to-one, and they're much more inclined to be forthcoming with information to a medical officer than they will be perhaps to their chain of command. So we tried to advocate for change within the system, and very quickly we realised that the military command structure has very little autonomy, very little resources to solve these problems, and we had to step out then. So you can't really talk to the media when you're in the military. It's kind of a informal gagging clause there, which I understand, So in order for me to engage and advocate for better terms and conditions for our serving personnel and their families, I had to leave the Defence Forces, unfortunately. So I left about 5.5 years ago. And then we just spoke to some journalists who were very friendly and very understanding. Spoke to some broadcasters, radio and TV, and then they kind of realised, well, there is actually a genuine issue here. And then somebody called a general election, and we said, you know what a good way to further advocate for better conditions of service for our military community. And I guess there must have been some kind of a tidal wave of support in Kildare South. It really struck a chord, and a lot of people identified with the cause, and it resonated with other people. And we got a lot of votes, and we got voted into the National Assembly. So it's a good sign for any country when a relative unknown can the name on a form without anybody's permission, and 4 weeks later can have a seat in the national parliament. I mean, there's not many countries in the world where that's possible, and it is possible in this country, and it just tells you how great a country we have.
You have momentum. You have momentum.
Yeah, I think too, it's great morale for the Defence Force community and the Defence Force members and families to know that there was somebody who put their name forward, and everybody knew it within the families that there's someone, a Defence Force member, former Defence Force member, putting their name in and everybody was watching waiting for you to get elected. And the same will happen again, because it's really important, I think, for the Irish Defence Forces and for all veterans to be able to, they serve their country. Now it's about representing their people and where they live in their communities at government level.
Yeah, it was a great election, really. I remember those 48 hours in Punchestown. You were getting texts from all over the world, from Syria, from Lebanon, from Africa, everybody wishing you well. It was like the Eurovision. Oh, you're in this position now, and they were following it live and everything. They knew more about it than I did. But it was a massive lift for the entire defence community, and it's proven to be very, very fruitful as well. And as we said, a lot of good things have happened. So just going back to my medical officer days, people didn't have money to put fuel in their car to come to work the following morning. Yeah. The wages have now improved by 48% for 3-star privates. Also, the guy with the knee, who was concerned about his contract, there's now private medical care for all ranks in the Defence Force. So if you injure your back in service or in the local GA match the night before, you now have access to private medical care to get you back to work and get you back in the fight as soon as possible. So, I mean, that's an incredible turnaround in only 5 years' time. I just wonder, with excitement, really, what more we can achieve in the next 5. If we've achieved all those things already in the last 5, what's the possibility for the next 5 as well? And we've some great plans coming up. I think the key is that we've served our apprenticeship at this stage.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think there's great opportunity there to bring in some further advances over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just for our viewers, Kildare South, Kildare is split into two constituencies, Kildare North and Kildare South. Some might say Kildare North and Kildare South they're different in their own ways. But Kildare South, you have the Chleirigh, you have Newbridge, which are, have massive, defence force areas as well. And then it sweeps down nearly towards but just bits of Laois, nearly little bits of Carlow as well. So it's it's got a lot going on in it. It has the same challenges as I imagine, like everywhere else, trade, housing, healthcare, and obviously the defence forces is a massive driver for Kildare South as well.
Absolutely, Kildare is the home of the defence forces, and it's the largest employer there as well. And there's generations that have been there, and even before the Irish Army was formed, the British Army were there as well. So it's really steeped in military history. And as I was told once, the defence forces really are the community in Kildare. As in, you had 2 choices back in the 90s when I was growing up. You could get involved with horses, or you can get involved in the defence forces. And now there's obviously a much broader opportunity there now with multinational tech sector and everything. But they were 2 hours at a time. So every crossroad, every road, every boreen, there's an army man or an army woman at the end of it. And it's just an incredible network. It's Ireland's ultimate network, really. And it's great to see that they're finally getting the recognition they deserve. And resources are coming on stream. There's an extra 100 million in the defence budget for 2025. Now, I know it's not fantastic. It's not perfect. We'd like much more, but it is a good start. And if we can keep that momentum going into 2026 and 2027, if we increase it by an extra 150 million every year, that will make a big difference. I mean, next year, for instance, the Air Corps are buying helicopters for the first time in 20 years because money is finally coming on stream now. So finally, people see progress. Your son as well, Roisin, hopefully he's detecting them. I'm glad you mentioned about the improvements in Kilkenny Barracks, about the new gym and the new accommodation there. I suppose it's very important to mention this isn't on a PowerPoint slide, or it's not on a document or anything like that. This is physically happening. There's people physically laying blocks in the Curragh at the moment, mixing cement, putting up buildings, the rebars being put into position, the iron girders, so people can physically see that they're actually getting that more resources and support than they had in the past. So it's great to see evidence of progress.
And do you feel, Cathal, as well, like before you might have seen, like, you have the Department of Defence on one hand and you have the Defence Forces, and they were kind of like in kind of clashing, like, a civil servant will think like a civil servant, a Defence Force member will think like a Defence Force member. Like, the Defence Force said, we need helicopters. The civil service go, no, you do with the ones you have, don't have the money or whatever. Like, do you think there's a kind of a clash? There was a clash between the two, and you think if we got more Defence Force members kind of transitioning into roles into the civil service in the Department of Defence, that would make a huge difference?
Yeah, so for sure there is friction and tension pretty much at the higher levels. At the lower levels, everybody gets on very, very well. But there is friction, and I suppose there's 3 points of clashing, really. First of all, it's the uniforms versus the suits. That's the first one. Then you have the civil servant mindset versus the military mindset. So military want to do stuff, whereas I guess civil servant culture is more about process and slowing everything down. Then you have the male-female clash as well. So the majority of the Department of Defence are female. It's about 80% female, 20% male, and it's about 90%, 10% in the Defence Force, the male-female divide. So that just shows that the 3 points of contention. But I guess the solution is very, very simple. Again, it goes back to Roisin's point. If there was a full-time standalone defence minister, to me, the defence apparatus is like a GAA hurling team. I suppose I can say that to Kilkenny people, you know exactly what I mean. That the Defence Force are the forwards, the Department of Defence civil servants are the backs, and then the minister is the goalkeeper. And that's the way it should be looked at, that it is one team and they succeed or they fail together. And because what's happened over the last 30 years in particular, the forwards are the only people getting scrutinised, getting assessed, getting examined, getting reviewed, and they're the ones who are getting all the abuse. And then the backs and the goalies get away with everything. They're never assessed, they're never reviewed. And to me, that's not good enough. The entire team should be assessed, the entire team should be reviewed, and the entire team should be working together. And this idea of us and them has just got to stop.
And Deputy Cathal Berry, you're probably canvassing and knocking at the doors right now, getting ready for the general election, which we're anticipating will be called Thursday or Friday. What is the main concerns of your constituency when you're knocking canvassing at the doors?
Housing is number one. Healthcare number two. Education is big in Kildare because there's not enough seats for schools or on school buses. The population is increasing so much. Rural Ireland, farming, and then national security. So from national security point of view, I'll be putting the Garda Síochána and the Defence Force there because antisocial behaviour and crime is a big one there. But the main message we're getting is don't change a thing about what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. We just want to see more of it. And they're looking forward to the next 5 years and what we can deliver for the constituency.
And if, say, for argument's sake, it's very possible that the government, be it whatever its composition, relying on independence. I'm sure you'd be willing to sit down and discuss, and you'll probably have your own forms that you'd like to pursue. Defence Force has been a pretty big one, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's very important not to prejudge the people, though. So it's the people's prerogative who they return to Parliament, and then it's my obligation to work within those parameters, basically. So listen, I'd have an open mind for sure. I'll serve in any capacity, be it in government or in opposition, depending on where I can have greatest impact and how the numbers play out. But no, a role. Advocacy is important, and advocacy has its function. But an even more important function would be to have an executive function, to have the levers of authority, to have a budget. So you're not just asking for something anymore; you're directing for something to happen. And I think that would be a historic day for the defence community if something like that was to happen. And we'll know between now and Christmas.
We certainly will. And the election date we're anticipating is the 29th of November.
Yeah, that seems to be the landing zone that people are zooming in on. The only thing that remains really is when is it going to be called? When is the Dáil going to be dissolved? When is Taoiseach going to go to the park and request a dissolution of the Dáil from the President? Will it be Wednesday night? Will it be Thursday AM? Will it be Thursday PM? Will it be Friday PM? To be honest, it's largely irrelevant to me. We're good to go. We're just waiting now. And it's not really an issue. I think military people are generally comfortable enough with uncertainty. We don't need to know. We'll still get a 3-week notice before the polling day actually happens. So, I mean, that's plenty of time. And I think, a lot of people have made up their minds who they're voting for at this stage because of the work that was carried out over the last 4 3/4 years anyway. So all you're doing is you're just reminding people to come out and vote, and wish them all the best of luck.
And independents, I think they're on about 15% in the most recent poll that I looked at, which is quite healthy. Do you feel that there's an appetite still there for independent political thinking? Because we have seen independents being part of governments in the past, and we've seen just independence is a very, very broad term as well. There's very different shades of them, if you know what I mean. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely sense there's still a very strong independent wave out there. I guess for a number of reasons, I think people value the autonomy that an independent TD actually has. Like I work with everybody in Parliament, they all have their democratic mandate. So whether you're in government or whether you're in opposition, we all work together for the betterment of the people. Also in Ireland, we have a very strong parliamentary whip system, and it's very strong in Ireland. And if you disobey the whip, then you're expelled from the party for 6 months at a minimum. Whereas independent TDs, every vote is a free vote. Every vote is a conscience vote. And you've much more autonomy, much more latitude. And I think people appreciate that as well. Like I'm in the regional group at the moment, which is quite a moderate caucus of 8 independent TDs. We get on famously well, and we have done for the last nearly 4 3/4 years as well. And there's never been a sharp word between us. We're getting loads of things over the line. We don't have any appointed leader or anything like that. But that's not a disadvantage. I think it's actually an advantage. Everybody respects each other's points of view, and we support each other when appropriate and when we can as well. So I think independent politics is here to stay. And it's not a binary choice between party or independence. I think independent TDs work best in the presence of parties, and I think parties work best in the presence of independent TDs as well. So there's kind of a symbiotic relationship there, which is very important.
And I suppose the ultimate aim is, Cathal, to be in a position where your vote, counts, where, as an independent, my own thinking would be is that if you have an opportunity to squeeze a concession, you squeeze that concession, be it for the defence forces or for whatever sector of society. So I suppose you ultimately want to get in a position where your vote does really matter.
Yeah, so obviously the vote comes from the democratic mandate you get from the people. So it's not really my vote; it's actually the people's vote that elected me. That's very important. But also, I found it's not as that the hard power of that transaction isn't utilized as much as people might think. The soft power of the logic of your argument is far more effective. I mean, you don't have to coerce somebody into agreeing with you by using your vote. If you can convince them of the compelling nature of your argument anyway, and they're totally on board. So if you can do it by consent rather than coercion, then all the better, because that they have complete buy-in then, and they believe that your plan is their plan, and that's where everybody wins. So it's good to have the trump card in your back pocket if you have to deploy it. But what I found is actually just the compelling nature of the arguments that you're making. If you can win over the person on the far side of the table, that's far more effective. So that's hopefully that helps. And if you're regarded as an honest broker, as someone who's upfront and honest and not looking for publicity or not looking to try and get clickbait or try and get grandstanding, or that, if you're genuinely interested in solving the problem, that'll be instantly apparent. And sure, every politician in the Parliament wants Ireland to be a better place and to get problems solved. So you're pushing an open door if you've thought through your proposal and if it has merit and if it is implementable.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because Paul and I were talking a couple of days ago, do you think that there is a real public awareness of who the TDs are and the senators are in Dáil Éireann? Do we have that awareness, even locally?
Great question. I would say no. Before I got involved in politics myself, I wouldn't really have known who the local TDs or senators were. I wouldn't have approached them at all. You would have known who the various ministers were, but you generally wouldn't have interacted with them anyway. So to answer your question, I think you're 100% right. We don't really know who our political representatives really are, and whose fault is that, or is it anyone's fault? I mean, it's just one of those things. I mean, people are busy and people have busy lives, and I guess they have other priorities as well. Now, as the election approaches, I think people are become more attuned. They say about the second week of the election, people start thinking, going, okay, I have a decision to make in 2 weeks' time, and you kind of zoom in a little bit more than normal. But as a general rule, in the run-of-the-mill, some politicians think they're important, but really they're not really important in people's lives unless they do something wrong. And I would say that politics isn't an important profession. There's far more important occupations out there, but it is the most consequential. It is the apex occupation. And the reason I say that is when we get things right, there's 5.3 million people in Ireland. 5.3 million people benefit when we get things right, and 5.3 million people suffer when we get things wrong. So it is the most consequential. You need to get some good, high caliber people into Leinster House to ensure that they're making the right decisions. And I would say that the integrity and the caliber of your politicians is a key determinant in the success or otherwise of a society.
And I suppose one thing about our electoral system is we have multi-seat constituencies. We elect people to 5, 4 or 3 seaters, like Kildare South, technically a 4-seater, but it's actually a 3 at the moment because Sean O'Friel is automatically re-elected. I suppose you have a constituency office in Newbridge, if I'm correct, and I can make an appointment if I had an issue, and I can see you. Whereas in other countries, say some parts of the UK, even for example, you might only see your your MP at election time. But do you think that ability to be able to just meet people on the ground to connect, that really informs the work that you do in the Dáil, which is the number one objective of a parliamentarian is to legislate? So do you think that type of being on the ground, listening to people's concerns, is still very important?
Absolutely, and it keeps people grounded as well, which is really important. And remember, TD, it doesn't mean you're a member of Parliament. Other countries have MPs, members of Parliament, but TD is a Teachta Dála, which is a messenger to the Parliament, which is a very, very important distinction. So your real place of work is actually in your constituency, and you travel to Leinster House then, to the Dáil, to our House of Representatives, as the Constitution describes, to represent your constituents. And there's 3 roles of TDs, really. I'd say, first of all, representation. Secondly, legislation, as you said, but also diplomacy. I think you have to be a diplomat as well. We live in a democracy where there's diffusion of authority and diffusion of power. There's no real one authoritarian ruler like other countries have. So you have to be able to work with people and figure out how a system works, because everybody has a small little bit of power and a few budgets, and you've got to weave all those things together once you navigate your way around the system to get to the appropriate outcome. So that takes a bit of deft diplomacy as well. So they're the big 3 roles of the TD. I think it's a fantastic job. Would I recommend it to anybody? Absolutely, it's worth a go. And even if you don't get elected, a 3 or a 3.5 week campaign, it's worth going through that journey. You don't need any money to do it. Your social media accounts can be set up for free. You don't have to put up posters. But if you have something that you're deeply passionate about and you want to communicate with the public, and you want a platform to do so, then the general election is a very good opportunity to do so. And I would thoroughly recommend it.
And definitely, when you think about, as you mentioned earlier on, when you were a medic, when you had Defence Force members coming to you saying, I don't have enough money for fuel for my car or my leg, I can't afford to be out, or something like that. You think, like, had you not, made that decision to step out of where you were into the political arena, you wouldn't have seen changes in pay, and you wouldn't have seen, health benefits change as well. So I suppose it just goes to show that, when you do, when you do get the opportunity to do something like that, and you can achieve something, that must be, huge satisfaction.
Absolutely. And again, it wasn't me that did it at all, actually. It was the 5,700 people who voted for me were the ones who did it. So I only have one vote. It was the people who recognised that it was a just cause, and were prepared to back it with money, with shoe leather, with their time. They were the ones who knocked on the doors and trudged around Kildare South in January 2020 and in the first week in February 2020, in the midst of winter. They were the ones who deserved the credit. They're the ones who altered the course of history and turned the tide. And I think it is an example that if there is a campaign out there, if there's a cause out there that would benefit from a national platform, and if you approach them the right way, if you're respectful and courteous and allow the merits of the argument speak for themselves, you can be highly, highly effective over a 5-year term, and perhaps even longer. If we get another term out of this, we can really deliver from a national security point of view and make things even better. The momentum has started now. We really have to keep it going, and we'll see how things play out over the next 2 weeks.
Cathal, you mentioned the American elections, and you're especially from the defence force sector, and you was as well. You're looking from the Middle East, etc. A lot of people saying, if Trump wins and whatever the result, and hypothetically, if President Donald Trump wins another term in office, do you see Ireland building a good relationship with America? A lot of people say, economically, trade war will happen. But do you see then the Irish government building relationships and working with America?
So the Irish government and the Irish state, whoever's in government, will always interact with democratically elected leaders of democratic countries. So I think you'd have a rerun of our relationship with the Conservative government in London, number 10 Downing Street, under Boris Johnson. That's a very similar thing, that we realise it's going to be 4 years, 4 years max, and we'll try and muddle our way through for the next 4 years with a view to a better administration coming in, or a more friendly administration coming in 4 years' time. So it's amazing that the people-to-people contacts between the UK and Ireland prevented any major disruption. Yes, there was some short-term kind of changes, but that was just at a political level. And if you look what happened then, within 24 hours of the new UK government being elected under Keir Starmer, the attitude and the relations just changed literally overnight. So it just shows that the historic connections between Ireland and Britain are very, very strong from a people point of view. And that's what kept the relationship going. Similarly, the historic people-to-people connections between Ireland and the US are precisely the same. Some would argue perhaps even stronger. So we might be divided by geography, but we're united by history. And those people-to-people contacts are far stronger than any government-to-government contacts. Governments come and go. But people have been around for centuries, and they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, true. That is very true. Or you don't know. Sometimes, worst case scenario doesn't always occur. So it could be a positive relationship. You just don't know. So, but we always hope for the best possible outcome anyway.
Correct, and I wouldn't write off Kamala Harris. The initial results from Iowa are very encouraging. Massive female turnout in particular, and I'm habitually an optimist anyway. I think there's two outcomes for Tuesday's presidential election. Number one is a Trump victory, and number two is a contested result. But it seems to be heading towards a contested result where Trump won't accept the fact that he might have been beaten. And we could be on the cusp of a historic global event where the most powerful person in the world, for the first time in history, will actually be a woman, and a woman of colour as well. And that would send out a very powerful signal all over the world, particularly to authoritarian and theocratic regimes who build their entire structure on the fact that a male is superior, and all of a sudden now they'll have to shake hands and meet the most powerful person in the world, who happens to be a woman. So that it will undermine the very foundations upon what a lot of theocratic regimes are built on, and they'll be exposed to the houses of cards that they are. So I'm an optimist, and I think, yes, Trump's re-election is a possibility, but I believe in the better parts of humanity as well, and I think we could actually be on the cusp of a major seismic global political event, which would have very significant positive effects downstream all across the world. And I think it's high time that a woman, and a woman of colour, is president in the White House. So we'll wait and see how the next few days develop.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, one way or another, how it all pans out. And it's something we've been covering, Roisin, as well. We have some good interviews coming up with some very, very interesting commentators in America. So people should keep an eye out for that.
And it's true, it's like, I'm from the north, I'm from Derry, so I always grew up with listening to different people's points of view. Even up in Derry, I think there was a massive misconception about how everybody thought we hated one another, but really we all liked one another. We all read everybody's different media and everything else. So it's all about just talking to different people, getting different people's perspectives, and all getting around the table and talking to one another.
Absolutely, and it's called democracy, and I happen to believe in it. I mean, and that's we're, they say that you're a TD now, you should be fluent in a number of languages, at least Irish and English, and possibly a continental language as well. But I think that the most important language that you need to be fluent in is you need to be fluent in silence, just to be able to listen to people. And take their views on board. And whenever I go and do a panel discussion, whether it's on TV or radio or wherever, if it's a conference, I'm very, very keen to give other people an opportunity to speak as well. Yes, for professional courtesy reasons. Yes, because I respect freedom of speech. But probably thirdly and most importantly is I'm very interested to hear what they have to say, and hopefully they might be able to teach me a thing or two, and I get to change my views and take those perspectives on board. I think that's a very good attitude if you go in with an open mind rather than having a dogmatic approach and you're trying to win a debate or deliver a knockout blow. I mean, it's a very insecure way of approaching any kind of discussion. You should be going in there with an open mind and looking to learn.
No, it's always nice to know that you can have a difference of opinions with different people, and know that you have that safe space to agree to disagree, and have that critical thinking where you can get people to make up your own minds and learn from one another as well. So I think that's very key, especially in politics, where you can agree to disagree and have different opinions and show leadership in that way.
Yeah, and let's remember, I mean, just because they disagree with you in public at the panel, when they're driving home that evening, they can very easily change their views, and you can actually have a lot of influence on people's views, even though you don't realize it. And a couple of weeks later, then they'll show up at another TV station and they'll be echoing what you said, and they'll be presenting those views as their own, which is perfectly fine, because it just shows the influence that you might have. So if you do have a message to deliver, and it is a compelling case, it speaks for itself. Don't undermine your delivery by being nasty or trying to treat people poorly, and because that'll immediately get them on the defensive and not willing to take your views on board. But if you give your views in a very honest, forthright and respectful way, people go, oh, okay, I hadn't considered it like that, hadn't thought of that, maybe I'll amend my perspective as a result. So that's the way I approach things, whether I'm on a panel interview or whether I'm inside in Parliament. The approach seems to be working. We've good relationship with everybody, whether it's in opposition or in government. We're getting things done. And let's remember, the next Dáil is probably going to be the most fragmented Dáil in Irish history. There's going to be there's 10 different groupings at the moment. There could be 12 different groupings the next time. There's an extra 14 TDs. So it's a lot of new ground. About half of the TDs would have never been TDs in the past. So we're going to need people who can work cross-party, who can work cross-border, who can identify common ground and get people working together, and I think they're important skills to have.
It's all about agreeing to disagree with integrity, and knowing when you know someone, you can disagree with them, but you can respect them. Go out for a cup of coffee, or even drive home in the same car again if you're from the same constituency. And I think that's what people want. They want to be able, as you said, the free speech. You're an advocate of freedom of speech, and I think that's very key, is agreeing to disagree respectfully with integrity, knowing that, as you said, and knowing it's always good to know when we're electing someone, you know where you stand with that person. You can disagree with them, but you know where you stand with them.
Absolutely, and just because they disagree with you doesn't mean they're a bad person.
No,
it just means that they just happen to disagree with you at that time.
Yeah.
Their views are also open to modification depending on how effective your arguments and your discussions are as well. So just because they agree with you on a Tuesday does not mean they're going to disagree with you on a Friday. And if you are able to convince and persuade by logical argument, then how more effective you're going to be. And I would say reason always trumps rhetoric. So if your reason and logic make sense, you're far more likely to get traction. And what what an insult it would be to all our great teachers if we were to just succumb to slogans and abandon logic and reason when they were needed most. Like we've heard the slogans, drain the swamp, build a wall, get Brexit done, stop the boats, lock her up, And once you even do a delve slightly under the bonnet in relation to any of those slogans, they're completely no substance behind them whatsoever. It's just waffle. And the old UK government, the Conservative Party, Tories, totally exposed. All they had was a slogan built on nothing. And in fairness to Ireland, I think our approach to Brexit was very, very effective. First of all, the Irish Parliament spoke with one voice, which was highly, highly unusual. So only one message coming from Dublin, and the Europeans picked up on that and said, wow, okay, there is an issue here. The UK had no prep done. And when I say the UK, I mean number 10 Downing Street, this Boris Johnson government at the time. Whereas we recognised that, right was on our side and that this government in the UK wasn't going to last forever. And if we stood by our guns, we could outmaneuver, outfox, and outperform the Tories. And that's precisely what happened. A great victory, not just for the Irish government at the time, but in the entire Irish Parliament and the Irish public as well. And we're reaping the benefits. And it just shows how politics really is the art of the possible. We had an incredibly complex situation in the 6 counties. There was 2 binary options, really. You could stay in the UK, stay in the EU, and now you can do both. So it just shows that any political agreement really is a blank canvas. And if people approach it with a bit of imagination, you can draft any agreement as you see fit. So politics really is the art of the possible. And some problems are so pervasive and so that only politics can fix them. And they've been my 2 big lessons really from the last 5 years. And that's why I'm still very interested in another term, because there is so much good you can do if you do have a plan, if you do have a structure, and you approach it in the right way.
Deputy Cathal Berry, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, and especially with the canvassing and the election being called this week. What we usually do at the end of the programme in these is we give you the camera and the screen, and for you to talk directly to your voters.
Okay, for maybe 60 seconds.
For how long you want, the floor is yours.
So basically, I'll just hammer home and summarise a few points I've already made. First of all, politics is the art of the possible. Absolutely. You can see how politics has delivered for this country over the last 100 years. A lot of people saying that the country's a failed state. I'm kind of going, I think our great-grandparents and our grandparents would love to have the problems we have today in comparison to what they have had to live with over the last number of years. I think it's of all our history in Ireland, this is the best time to be Irish in Irish history. This is the best time to be living on the island of Ireland. I'm hugely ambitious for the future, hugely excited by the future. I think there's absolutely no limits to what this country can do. But I think we have to get our public representatives right first. And as I said during the presentation, the integrity and the calibre of your public representatives are a key determinant in how a country plays out. So I would say choose wisely in a few weeks' time. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased. I do like independent politics. I like having the autonomy. I like the freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom of action that being an independent gives you. But as I said as well, it's not a binary choice. I think independents work best with parties. And I think parties work best with independents as well. So it is that symbiotic relationship. So the plan really is to have an election between now and Christmas and to get ourselves a good government and a good opposition for the next 5 years to provide that reasoned and logical governance of the country with the appropriate checks and balances and accountability as well, to make this good country an even better one by the end of this decade in 2029. So how does that sound, Roisin? That's all I got.
It sounds brilliant. Deputy Cathal Berry, we wish you the very best of luck, and hopefully you'll come back on and join us on the Irish Political Roundup.
Hope to see you on the far side, Roisin. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you for your time.
Have a lovely evening, Kilkenny.
You too, and we hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We are delighted to introduce the Irish Political Roundup Community Notice Board.
Task Academy, which is run by Jeanette Delahunty, who was on the Irish Political Roundup very recently, talking about the subject of dyslexia, which is a video we'd highly recommend our viewers to check out. Is holding an educational event this coming March in 2025 on the 22nd and 23rd on the subject of neurodiversity in education, the Trauma Connection Conference. So it's taking place, as I said, on the 22nd and 23rd of March in the Ormond Hotel in Kilkenny from 9 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. They will bring you a number of speakers and workshops to add value to your role as a parent, carer, or professional. And this is creative family solutions. And this, as it says, Roisin, I think is a course that anybody who have a particular interest in this area would find it very, very beneficial. There's going to be some fantastic speakers speaking on those 2 days.
Especially as we have been covering neurodiversity here on the Irish Political Roundup. Remember, go to the Task Academy website and book your early bird tickets.
And remember, spaces are limited. Book early and you won't be disappointed.